Welcome back to Wired to Play, the podcast where brain science and classroom practice come together.
How are you, Jeni?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. We, in our last episode, a few episodes ago, we talked about standard-based education. And I wanted to bring that up because the last couple of weeks the first couple of weeks of May, as we head into the end of the school year, a lot of schools do standardized testing. Here in California, STAR testing.
Got it.
And so I think we should talk about this idea of testing and assessments and sort of what is worrisome about that, or what maybe impedes what we're talking about with brain development.
Oh, okay.
So the first thing I think that we should talk about is sort of the idea of STAR testing. So in California, STAR testing is usually done at the beginning of the school year and the end of the school year. And it is a push to understand sort of what the kids know and what the kids have learned. So that's why they do it at the beginning of the year and the end of the year. Unfortunately, the STAR test in many cases is not developmentally appropriate. They're asking questions, say, of third graders aren't really ready to answer, even at the end of third grade.
So are they testing them kind of like if they're already started fourth grade, maybe? So
exactly.
Got it.
So it's not always developmentally appropriate, the testing. And one of the things that I think is a really important thing for parents and teachers is this idea of standards, right? Because we talk a lot about standards, and I'm not even sure that I think teachers understand the idea of standards, but I'm not sure parents always understand what the idea of standards is. And so standards, what we really need to understand about standards, I believe, is that standards aren't the measure. Standards are the outcome, not how we teach.
Got it.
And unfortunately, what we've done with standardized testing is I think we've moved toward that's how we teach, right? We think that we have to teach to the standards, and the standards aren't really the problem, right? The standards aren't the issue. So in preschool, in pre-K, so let's talk today about pre-K through third grade.
Okay.
So in pre-K, we have standards, right? What are some of the standards you would say pre-K kids need to get from the beginning of the year in September to the end of the year in May? What are some of those things that you're looking for, or that parents should be looking for, or teachers looking for?
Well, I think the first thing is to see if the children are able to, follow simple directions. Are they able to hold a pencil? Are they able to maybe use scissors at the end of pre-K? Not perfectly, but are they able to hold the scissors correctly? Are they able to share? That's really important. Are they able to maybe dictate a story or repeat the story back that they have been
like the sequence of a story.
Correct.
Or something.
So those are some of the basic standards, but a lot of it's not about, are you able to write? Are you able to, write out every alphabet? Maybe some alphabet is polished, maybe some alphabet are not.
Everything that you said is a standard, right? In California, again, we use the California Foundations for pre-K.
Yes.
And the California pre-K foundations set up standards. One of the standards I know is follows directions.
Yes.
Right? So following directions, we don't really need a test for that. Because we do test that in standardized testing. We give them directions and see if they can follow it. But if we're going to really assess that, we can do that in a lot of ways that aren't paper and pencil ways.
Yes.
So what are some ways that you would maybe in a classroom follow directions? Or see if they have met that standard, if they can follow directions?
Cleanup time. Are they able to clean up? Are they able to transition from lunchtime to washing hands, giving those, commands of, okay, lunchtime, wash hands, bathroom, and you're able to see that on an everyday basis. And you're able to see at the beginning of the school year when you had to repeat yourself maybe a couple of times, to the end of the school year when they automatically know, like, it is cleanup time, I got my directions, I'm following through.
Developmentally, kids begin to be able to follow more directions, right? Like we say to a 2-year-old, maybe you give them a one direction, right? You say, go into the bathroom. We don't, with 2-year-olds, say, go into the bathroom, pull your pants down, do the, we don't give them the whole list.
Now, they're going to be on the first thing. They're in the bathroom.
So by the time they're 4 or leaving pre-K, we expect them to know a more faceted direction, right? We expect them to be able to we are able to give them 3 or 4 directions, and they should be able to do those things.
Correct.
But one of the things I loved about your point is it's an everyday thing. We don't need a test. We don't need to sit them down at a computer or an iPad and read them a set of directions and have them follow it on paper.
No.
We see them every day whether they can follow directions or not. And what we have to do as teachers is we have to assess that every day.
Yes.
And so we give kids directions, and we give kids directions all day, every day. Line up to get ready to go outside. Sit down for circle time. Sit down for lunch. Let's wash our hands and then sit down for lunch. Or let's wash our hands, sit down for lunch, fold our hands. Whatever the directions are that get them to that point. So we know that standardized testing was really put in place after No Child Left Behind.
Got it.
No Child Left Behind gave us a standard-based system of education. We call it standard-based education. And the reason for that was because it's a very sort of testing that, or doing then standardized testing gave us a very black and white vision of how schools, teachers, children were succeeding or not succeeding. And that's then how they got their money pot. That's how they got the funding that they needed to get.
Got it.
And so when we look at this idea of standard-based teaching along with standardized testing, that's where I feel some of the issue can be. And I think parents and teachers really need to be aware of that the children are almost being used to get the funding. Right? Children's education is being used to get the funding, but only through one measure, the standardized test.
So, a question here. The standards that are set for the children, are those standards incorporated into the curriculum that the teacher is going to be teaching throughout the school year?
I think yes, especially when we're teaching to the test. But unfortunately, what happens with teaching to the test and assessing only through the test, we are only measuring one thing. I'm going to give you an example. I have two kids,
Yes.
my 2 older kids. They are both very smart, and they were great in school. One of them was an achiever in school because she met the sitting quietly, all the things that schools really think are great.
For.
Yes, she did all of those things. And she was a very determined student. Josh was not as much. He was he's a really smart kid, but he wasn't as good in the classroom environment. But he was excelled on standardized testing. Katie never excelled on standardized testing. And my belief was she was just not a good test taker. When they were going off to high school, he did the standardized, for their high school, they did a high school placement test. And he scored off the charts and was put in all the AP classes just naturally. She did not score off the charts, and even though she had been in all honors classes leading up to high school, she did not automatically get placed in any of those AP classes. We had to say, we want her in the AP classes because we know she'll succeed. And she did. She went into the AP classes and she succeeded. Josh went into the AP classes, and because that wasn't the right kind of education for him, he wasn't engaged in the same way, he didn't do as well as in the AP classes. The test didn't give us the right information about those 2 students.
Wow, the measurements of having, 2 students using those tests and how it kind of like failed. And great that they were able to see that your daughter was going to excel, so just passed her, because if the teachers didn't, put their input, she would have been left in a younger, not challenging
That's
program.
Exactly right. Her 8th grade teacher really pushed for her to go into the AP classes because she'd done very well in honors classes all through middle school and should have gone into the AP classes and did very well in the AP classes. So that's the point I'm trying to make with standardized testing, is the idea that standardized testing is one measure, and it's not necessarily an authentic measure. For example, we're doing standardized testing in California, starting in TK, pre-K, 4 years old. 4-year-olds can't even read.
No.
How developmentally appropriate is it to sit them in front of a computer and expect them to do any kind of testing on a computer?
Their attention span for a 4-year-old is like minimal. Right. So they're going to fail that anyways.
Well, and one of the things that I have witnessed is the idea that teachers have to lead them through it. So who's taking the test? Is it the teachers or is it the kids? Yeah. And I'm not saying teachers are marking them. I think teachers are asking them the questions, but you're putting a lot of pressure on kids to do that, to complete that kind of test in that kind of testing environment, which just really is not developmentally appropriate for them, and takes away sort of that idea of play-based education, which was what we're kind of pushing for.
Well, yes, and if the teacher, especially TK, is involved, you're going to know if the child knows alphabet, numbers, first and last name, can follow directions faster than doing it on a test and having to send it off and let the state grade them to see. The state's not here having those interactions with the child.
Well, and again, they aren't necessarily authentic, right? They don't know, the test doesn't know, did that kid have a bad morning coming into the school? I remember when my kids used to, when they were doing testing at my kids' school, they always talked about giving them a good breakfast. And do all parents do that? I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm sure they want to. I'm sure they try.
Yeah.
But you were a mom. Sometimes mornings don't go the way we want them to go.
It's like, here's a granola bar.
And same with the teachers. Do teachers, tests don't take into consideration where teachers are at that day. What's the teacher been able to help them and support them through? And I believe teachers and parents all want what's best for the kids. They all want to help them, move forward. My question is just, is standardized testing the best way to do it? Yeah. So let's take a bit of a break, and then we'll come back, and let's talk about authentic assessment, ways that we can look at kids through play and through their activities that help us understand whether they're meeting the standards or not.
Great.
So again, let's just mention that standards are telling us what to teach, not how to teach.
Got it.
And also what to assess, but not how to assess. And I think that's a really important point, that we need to help parents and teachers and administrators and even lawmakers understand. We are not saying we shouldn't have standards. We believe development is all about developmental milestones. We talk in development, as a developmentalist, we talk all the time about milestones, because milestones are important. They give us a guide to what the child's supposed to be doing. So if the milestone is that a child walks about 12 to 14 months, 15 months, if we see a child that isn't even crawling yet, we know to be concerned. We know there might be an issue. So we get them the help they need, or we give them the support they need. That's the same thing that standards are supposed to be in education, as we move through the academics of education. When are we supposed to be able to hold a pencil and write? When should we know our letters? When should we be able to read? Unfortunately, one of the things that's happening right now in society is we keep pushing those down, where we had kindergartners when you and I were in kindergarten, and even our kids, there was a lot more just play in kindergarten. Now, there is no play in kindergarten. Some kindergartens don't even have play areas. Because they're doing a lot of pencil and paper to get them ready for that standardized test, because that standardized test is so important for the success of the school. And so what does that do for kids? What kind of anxiety does that put on the kids? There's true anxiety when our kids are being pushed to do something that isn't
Yeah.
developmentally appropriate?
You know, my daughter is, she's in her late 20s, and she did great going into freshman year, got into AP math, you know, and I was like, yes, and she was failing, and she would come home and say, I need to drop this class, you need to help me, I'm failing. And I'm saying, nope, they test you, they said you know this stuff, you're just not applying yourself. And you know, eventually we did pull her out. She did her basic math, regular algebra, but to this day, she can't stand math. I'm like, oh, you got to take math. Oh, no, I'm not taking math. I don't want to take math. Just the whole idea of that, it gave her anxiety. And she's a grown-up now, and she still has that feeling of how that teacher made her feel. You're not applying yourself. You tested so well, you're not applying. And she's like, I'm doing the best I can, but she just wasn't grasping what was being, taught during that class.
And the test didn't necessarily do a good job of talking about how she was with math. So maybe she did really well in the math test that got her placed in that class, but maybe she was already anxious about math. Maybe she didn't love math going into that class. And maybe if there was a humanness to seeing that she, oh, look how anxious she is, maybe pushing her up to a math class that she's not really going to be great at isn't going to cement those math skills for her. It's just going to make her feel like, I can't do math.
Yes.
And that's what we have to look at with all of the assessments. So one of the things we want to do when we're looking at how we're setting up curriculum, and if we're talking about if we want to switch to this idea of play-based education, is we set up play-based activities with assessment in mind. Mm-hmm. So in preschool, that's pretty clear. I think that there's a lot of programs that can do that. Not all programs do it. There are a lot of programs that believe in pencil paper activity. We found that out when we took over this school. But in preschool, we have this idea of developmentally appropriate activities, and then how do we assess those activities as opposed to testing them. So when we have here at the school, we have a pre-K or a kindergarten readiness sort of test, or a kindergarten readiness sort of idea. So what is it, you named some of them, that kids need to know for kindergarten? They need to be able to cut. They need to be able to, hold a pencil. They need to be able to maybe write their first name correctly, or at least be starting to attempt that. They need to know their colors. They need to know their shapes. One of the things that we don't do is set them down and test for all of those things. We don't sit them down on a day and say, okay, today's the day we're going to test your kindergarten readiness to see if you're really ready for kindergarten. We do it in a more what we call authentic assessment way. So we look at, we set out a shape activity. And we watch the kids, and we maybe jot down some notes. We call those anecdotal notes.
Yes.
We jot down some notes, and we talk about, or we watch them play, and we see, do they know their triangle? And maybe we ask them a few authentic questions. Mm-hmm. So what would you do in a classroom if you wanted to know? You'd set up that activity, and then how would you assess those kids playing in it?
I would go by asking open-ended questions, by saying, what are you doing? What do you have? If I'm looking to see if they even know numbers, how many do you have of the object? And then I'll be able to say, oh yeah, they identify it. Hey, there's colors there too. Can you tell me the different colors that are being used? Then I'm going to be able to do that. I'm going to be able to hit, do they know their numbers? Do they know their colors? Do they know their shapes?
Right, like hand me the red block.
Yes.
Hand me the red triangle. Now I know if they know red and triangle, right?
Yes, and it's all in a game form, not testing. And now other children are going to come around, and I'm going to be able to get assessments off multiple children at the same time, instead of saying this is a test and feeling the pressure.
And we can still, if we need the form, we could still fill out the form.
Yes.
We can make the check. I know you know a red triangle. Check, check. They know red, they know the triangle. So I think sometimes it seems clearer, the idea of play and assessment in preschool. But the same thing applies to older kids.
Yes.
We can see if you understand the times tables, if we can set up an activity where you talked about a couple episodes ago, you talked about the idea that times is just adding. So if you can do that, if you can set up an activity where you're putting 4 groups of 5 and you talk about 4 times 5, you can see if the kids are getting those concepts. As opposed to the story I told you where I learned the multiplication tables, had no concept of what they meant.
Yes.
I did them like a poem, right? I learned them like a poem. It wasn't until I was in college that I understood what the times tables meant. The concept of what you're saying is it's just adding in a kind of a drawn out way.
Yes.
So that's one of the things we want to look at with authentic assessment when we're looking at play-based activities. We're looking at setting up activities that help us make those assessments. So we've done that all year long.
Yeah, and our parents have buy-in at the preschool age. They understand it. They look forward to those, the assessments we give them, and then they go off to real school, and somehow they forget the tools that were used with their preschool child and how their child learned. And we forget those as parents.
Right. And if we go back to that idea of play-based education being so important for brain development, it doesn't stop at 4 or 3 or 2 or whatever age we think they need to be given paper and pencil skills. Our brain development doesn't stop then. Our brain development doesn't stop at our ages.
No.
We need to continue to give them hands-on activities from which to make those brain connections. And then we need to assess those hands-on activities. Because if we give them hands-on activities and we don't assess in an authentic way, then we're kind of, throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
We need to really help teachers. And one of the things that I think is really important is that teachers need to have support in this.
Yes.
It can't just come from teachers. It has to come from everywhere. One of the things that I think, if we look back at the money part again, is that there are a lot of curriculum companies who make a lot of money off standardized teaching, off that idea of standardized-based teaching. They make a lot of money, and I'm not saying they shouldn't. That's their jobs. That's what they do. That's what their stakeholders want them to do, is make a lot of money. But when we're getting a canned curriculum handed to us that is all paper and pencil based and very standardized based and doesn't have all of those kind of rich play components, and it's unfortunate. I told you last year I spent a little time with my grandson. He was struggling in his class, and so we decided to pull him home for the end of 2nd grade. And so I was looking a lot at the curriculum because I've not taught elementary school. I've not taught 1st through 3rd grade, but I really looked at the curriculum during that time. He was in 2nd grade, his 2nd grade curriculum. And there are some rich activities that the curriculum companies put in, but teachers don't feel they have time to do them because they've got to get the standards done because they have to get the test. They have to have them ready for the test.
Yes.
And one of the things we were able to do, because he was home with us all day and he was one child, and we were, my husband and I both, we were 2 people with 1 child, we were able to do some of those richer activities. And he really blossomed under those. And so what if we could turn it on our head, right? If we could do that. One of the things as we continue our discussion about standards and testing and all of that is that we want to understand that when we merge play and standards, children really benefit.
Yes.
And you were saying that when we were on the break and we were chatting, that play helps us understand the concepts of education, not just rote memorization, not just being able to hold a pencil and do the mechanics of writing. We can play helps us understand sort of why we're doing the things. There's so many things that happen while we're working. While we're letting children play, they gain deep understanding of things. They get a strong executive function, which we've talked about before. They have emotional safety, and they're motivated. Kids aren't motivated. I have a little granddaughter who's in 1st grade. She is not motivated to sit and fill out handouts. She's not motivated. She cannot stand it. And I think I've talked to you about that before. She cannot stand it. She hates it. But she loves learning. She loves coming to she comes up, I have a craft room upstairs, and she'll make mail. because I have a little mailbox area, so she'll make mail. And she writes on all that mail. She writes not sentences because she's not really quite there yet, but she writes all kinds of things, and she asks me how to spell, and she'll work on that for an hour. An hour. And she'll, and mail all these little letters she's written. Where if I make her, if I sit to do her homework packet with her, she balks at it. I don't want to write a sentence. Or she wants to write, she'll say, it'll be a word, and she'll say, what's the shortest sentence? I want a 3-word sentence. I am a dog.
Yeah.
Right? I am a dog. And I'll say, no, you've started every sentence with I. Let's think of a different way. No, I don't want to do that. I just want to write short. And it's not really the writing she dislikes. It's sort of that the roteness of it. I don't know if that's even a word. That's what she doesn't like.
I think she wants to have control. She wants to have control.
Sure. She for sure wants control.
Yeah, of like how she writes it, when she writes it. And you could just, those sentences, implement it anywhere around her little workstation.
Yes.
And be able to still get that concept.
Absolutely. And she is a second child. And so she has a mind of her own, and control, you're right, control is a bit, but she has had a little bit of trouble she's in first grade this year, with sitting to do her work, because she has to do her work. And she's had a few little behavioral issues. And those behavioral issues, and I'm not saying she should be allowed to have behavior issues. She should be made to mind and do the things she needs to do. But my argument was maybe if she was in a more play-based environment, doing some of those same skills. Like say maybe the teacher set up a mail kind of situation and put this week's spelling words and said, okay, we're going to practice this week's spelling words by making letters for all of the people in our class.
Yes.
Or we're going to write letters pick 2 people to write letters to, and you get to use, but you have to use some of the spelling words, and I'm going to put all the spelling words up. Then we can see, is she able to write the words? Is she making that connection between the written word that she's looking at and writing the word herself?
The definition of the word.
What's the definition of the word? Because if we're going to be writing them in a sentence, we have to know the definition. And the point that the teacher makes in giving the homework, I don't disagree with. We need to learn to spell. We need to learn to write. We need to learn to read. All of those things important. Those are all standards that we need to meet. But could we do it in a way that's more interesting to the children than all 28 kids or 30 kids or however many kids sitting and writing on this handout in the same way every single time? And then we can authentically assess. We can see, is she getting it? We could still give a spelling test if we need to give a spelling test, but we can give her this opportunity to use the skills and the things she's learned in a very hands-on, active way.
Yes, organic way.
An organic way, right? So we'll talk more about standards and standard-based education as we move on, through our podcast time with people. But we hope this has given you some ability to see what we're talking about with standards. Standards aren't the problem.
No.
Standards are necessary. We use standards all the time. We want to make sure kids are hitting certain developmental milestones all through education.
Yes.
How is it that we give it to them in the best way, and how do we assess it in the best way, right? Yep. And we think our stance is play is the best way in this age group, 0 to 8, to give kids the information they need.
Yes, I agree.
Right? Because we know play isn't optional.
It's essential.
It's essential. It's absolutely essential. See you next time.
Bye-bye.